There are 43 million young people who are locked into predatory student loan debt, an entire generation of young people that does not have an economic future. And there's only one place those votes can go to put an end to that student debt. You're looking at that campaign right now. If that word gets out, 43 million is actually enough to win the race in a three-way presidential race.
We call for canceling this debt, bailing out the students like we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street who crashed the economy and stole our homes. So the specifics on the plan is about $1.3 trillion in student debt, but we bailed out Wall Street to the tune of about $17 trillion. So if we found a way to do that, we can do student debt. Here's one way that I propose. That debt is largely held by the federal government. The Federal Reserve can buy that debt, and then they can essentially cancel it. In doing that, they're not burdening taxpayers, they're basically expanding the money supply. What that means is that they are putting money in the pockets of the younger generation to spend it into the economy, and that benefits everybody.
On the day that Bernie Sanders endorsed Hillary Clinton, the floodgates opened into our campaign, and our campaign contributions went off the charts, particularly with these trademark $27 contributions that continue to flow into our campaign. The volunteers are coming in. Our ballot access drives were re-energized here in Minnesota. We just turned in 3 times the requirement for the signature at an incredible moment that the American public has basically said no to politics as usual, where the 2 establishment candidates are the most disliked and untrusted in our history, where 40, and depending on the poll, even 50% of Americans have divorced the Democratic and Republican parties, and where the progressive elements of the Democratic Party have real questions about what their future is in the Democratic Party, with the door having been slammed on the Sanders campaign. I'm the one candidate in the race that is not corrupted by lobbyist money, by corporate money, which we do not accept in the Green Party, nor by a super PAC. So I alone have the unique ability to actually stand up for what everyday people need, and that is an emergency jobs program, like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. We are calling for a Green New Deal, because we do have, for most Americans, a continuing economic crisis, and we also have a crisis of our climate, which we see in the floods in Louisiana that have displaced 20,000 people this weekend, the fires in California that again are threatening thousands of homes, and the heat waves all across America. Right now we have an emergency that actually makes Pearl Harbor look like small potatoes, because it's not just Pearl Harbor, it's all harbors at risk and all coastal population centers, estimated to be something like 600 million people that will be climate refugees from this first level of meltdown of the ice sheets. And the science telling us that within potentially as soon as 2050, we could see even 9 feet of sea level rise, creating basically a civilization-ending catastrophe. We've had almost zero coverage on mainstream primetime TV. New York Times said as of about 2 months ago that Donald Trump had about $2 billion worth of free TV coverage. Hillary Clinton had about $1 billion. Bernie Sanders had about half as much, and our campaign wasn't even covered. We didn't even figure into the accounting. At this point, I'm just a candidate, so I don't have negotiating power, but I have found that the point of view that I represent, coming from the Green Party, which has parties in most countries around the world, that we're advocating for a way forward that puts peace over profit, that puts disarmament, nuclear disarmament, over the crazed nuclear arms race, that puts healthy development and fair trade agreements over these corporate trade agreements that empower an economic elite around the world to the detriment of workers, our environment, our public health, and our national sovereignty. Bernie's supporters have had a very distressing lesson in real time about what you can do in the Democratic Party. They've worked their hearts and souls out. When I was at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, outside of it most of the time, but I was also walking the halls a little bit, talking to press, I felt like a social worker because people were just coming up to me in tears about how they had put money they didn't have and time they didn't have, just poured their blood, sweat, and tears into that campaign. And then they felt locked out. They felt locked out by the superdelegates, by the way the Super Tuesdays are piled on each other that makes it very hard for an insurgent campaign to organize, and then by the email revelations that happened right before the DNC. People suddenly saw, oh my God, there's this collusion behind closed doors where the DNC was working with Hillary's campaign in order to smear Bernie. The lesson, I think, of the primary was that you can't have a revolutionary campaign inside of a counter-revolutionary party. We can turn this election around. Instead of splitting the vote, we have the potential to flip the vote. Instead of being the underdogs, we can actually be the top dogs and have a society that's actually working for all of us, that provides health care as a human right. Donald Trump can't really tell the truth about Hillary, and Hillary can't tell the truth about Donald, because they're both kind of representing the same